Ever heard of a twist of fate? The bearded guy is the one who once schooled the agent couple. He was having a blast over there while Uncle Dan was still digging into Susan's death records, laser-focused. Uncle Dan pondered, gazing at the elevator footage, when two youths flashed by, heading straight to the 16th floor for Susan. Next day, jogging old Joe was stopped. Turning, he couldn't believe his eyes. As a kid, he attended Uncle Dan's funeral and mourned his body, but now he spots Susan resurrected. What a shock. Those two young ones must hold the key. As soon as old Joe said they turned into a number, Uncle Dan whipped out the autopsy report, showing the fatal blow was a stab under the ribs. The technique was slick, clearly a well-planned murder. Yet Uncle Dan didn't have all the details, and had to enlist old Joe's help. Then Uncle Dan went into pitch mode for the agent murder case, pretending to be the deceased and starting to demo. Right hand gun, left hand kill. Susan clearly found something big. This revelation made Uncle Dan realize that's why she was in trouble, so he called old Joe to kickstart the investigation. As Uncle Dan took orders, a man asked for the airport. His keen intuition told him something was off. Uncle Dan took a wrong turn on purpose, but the guy didn't flinch, just kept his eyes glued on Dan. The moment the killer saw an opening, he pounced. Uncle Dan reacted swiftly, dodged and countered, leaving the killer helpless. He swiftly disarmed the guy, landed a blow to the nose, and of course, the killer had to whip out his... Uncle Dan hit the brakes, clutched the guy's arm, and performed a perfect drift to grab the gun under an empty overpass. A cinematic moment. With the killer's phone, Uncle Dan found it was all encrypted. Only spies could crack this stuff. So he decided to dispose of everything. The next day, he headed straight to old Joe's place, skipping the pleasantries, saying someone tried to take him out yesterday and noted the killer's phone was just reverse trace it, and they can find the puppet master. Old Joe played it cool, planning to investigate back home. The next second, Uncle Dan called back from another phone, and old Joe's rang. The jig was up. Since Uncle Dan faked death, ops paused. Old Joe's desk-bound, doing side jobs with his crew. To make ends meet, he had to scrimp with the bros, and Susan's death. Well, that was a last resort. Susan would soon find the truth, so they silenced her by murder. 7 years later, brothers became enemies. Uncle Dan didn't rush to pull the trigger. He knew old Joe's teammates were nearby and his family was at home, so he asked Joe to lead. Spotting 3 killers getting out of the car, Uncle Dan recognized them as old colleagues. Old Joe asserted they weren't gunning for Dan personally, but Uncle Dan wasn't having any of it. Since they killed Susan, they had to pay the price. With a smile, Uncle Dan turned to scoop up old Joe's daughter, asking his wife to take her away. A true farewell to the former comrade. Next meeting means a life or death duel. Uncle Dan knew they'd show no mercy, so he moved Susan's husband to safety overnight. As they left, old Joe's men entered to find it deserted. Meanwhile, old Joe sneaked to Uncle Dan's with someone. Meanwhile, Little Black next door helped paint walls and called Uncle Dan for snacks. Suddenly, barking was heard outside. Sayohe saw 2 men in black through the window. Uncle Dan, via remote monitoring, saw the killers picking the lock. Uncle Dan told Little Black to rush to the bookshelf and press the metal button to open the secret door. Behind the secret door, they were super safe. Old Joe entered, gun in hand, and they searched carefully. Little Black tensed up, hardly breathing. Old Joe found nothing next door, but he noticed the mirror's corner. He checked carefully with a flashlight. Little Black cowered, so embarrassed his diaper was wet. Luckily, it's a 2-way mirror. Only from inside could one see out. Old Joe breathed on the mirror, drew a crying face, and aimed his gun at it. Just as he was to pull the trigger, the phone rang. Uncle Dan. Old Joe realized he was under surveillance. Uncle Dan urged old Joe to hustle to the old beach house to wrap this up. Old Joe swiftly left with his teammates. As the killers left, Little Black slipped out but was killed upon opening the door. Though his link to Uncle Dan was unknown, the call at a critical moment was surely useful. Uncle Dan returned to the beach as a hurricane approached. The town was empty. He wasn't idle, parked and ready for battle. Without a second thought, he dispatched them swiftly for fully armed, with tactics that were actually seamless. One was on lookout outside, kicking the door in to scout. The squad maintained comms, and old Joe spotted a tower. This is an ideal vantage point. He used an ATEC scope to scan the town. But no matter how they split, for Uncle Dan, it was all for naught. Spotting a shadow, a teammate rushed after it with his gun. First, they blasted in with a scout grenade, then cautiously entered the house, only to find nothing after a full circle. Faced with a sudden flash of light, the men raised their guns in defense, but the first teammate was taken out on the spot. The others rushed in to seek revenge, but only found a shocked teammate left in the room. They continued their search. At a disadvantage, they split up, giving Uncle Dan a golden chance. Before they could react, he dealt a fatal blow with dual blades. Uncle Dan acted fast, wiped out foes instantly. Teammates were momentarily scared. They still managed to suppress their inner fears and kept on searching for the enemy, and Uncle Dan spotted old Joe's position in the rearview mirror.